So we're now in public session, and I wish to welcome you all to this meeting of the Joint Committee on Children and Youth Affairs to continue our hearings on the topic of tackling childhood obesity. We'll now have presentations from representatives of the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, the Department of Health and the Department of Education and Skills. I welcome to the meeting Dr. Anne-Marie Brooks, Principal Officer, Early Years Policy and Research, Department of Children and Youth Affairs, Ms. Ruth Doggett, Department of Children and Youth Affairs, Ms. Kate O'Flaherty, Director, Health and Wellbeing Programme, Department of Health, Mr. Lee McCormack, Assistant Principal Officer, Department of Health, Mr. Eamon Cusack, Principal Officer, Department of Education and Skills, Ms. Rita Sexton, Assistant Principal, Department of Education and Skills. I welcome members and viewers who may be watching our proceedings on Oireachtas TV to the public session of this committee. Just a brief note re-privilege, which you may have heard before, so I'll be as brief as I can. Before we commence, in accordance with procedure, I'm required to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you're entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You're directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you're asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that where possible you should not criticise or make charges against any person, persons or entity by name in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her or it identifiable. I remind members and witnesses to turn off their mobile phones, which may interfere with the sound system and also interfere with television coverage which is being streamed. So I wish to advise our witnesses that any submission or opening statement you have made to the committee will be published on the committee's website. I'm sure you're familiar with that fact as well. After your presentations there will be questions from members, and there's actually a lot going on inside and outside the Houses today, so there are a few members who are unfortunately unavailable to attend this morning, but you can rest assured that the rest of us will have plenty of questions and we'll have good interaction. So I now call on Dr. Brooks to make your opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairperson, committee members, thank you for this opportunity to present to the committee today on the matter of tackling childhood obesity. The committee will be aware of Better Outcomes, Brighter Futures, the national policy framework for children and young people that was launched in 2014. This whole of government policy framework identifies a range of measures to improve outcomes for children and young people, including measures to address childhood obesity. Since its publication and through its implementation structures, childhood obesity has been identified as a priority for cross-sectoral action. The Department of Health leads on this with the support of other government departments, including the Department of Children and Youth Affairs. Better Outcomes, Brighter Futures has facilitated new opportunities to strengthen cross-sectoral engagement and buy-in, in particular through the Children and Young Persons Services Committees around the country. The DCYA is committed to supporting the Department of Health with this and its wider work in this area. The Department was delighted to be able to assist the Department of Health in the development of the obesity policy by facilitating children and young people themselves to input into it and shape its content. DCYA is represented on the obesity group that has been established to oversee the implementation of this policy, and it's also represented on the healthy eating subgroup. For this opening statement, I'll concentrate on areas relevant to the department which it has progressed. So as the government department that has lead responsibility for early childhood education and care, or ECEC, we recognise we have a role to play in ensuring that publicly funded EC services seize the opportunities they are presented with to positively influence children's outcomes. We know for children attending these services on a full-time basis in particular that ECEC provides a very significant proportion of a child's daily food intake, as much as 70%. We also know that the Universal Free Preschool programme is availed by 96% of children in this country from the age of 2 years and 8 months, and provides a very significant opportunity to influence healthy eating habits from this early stage. So we have in place regulations which stipulate that services must ensure all children in attendance at EC services receive a nutritious diet which takes account of individual needs and preferences, and the TUSLA Early Years Inspectorate inspects against these regulations. Under these regulations, EC services are required to develop a policy on healthy eating in line with resources developed by the Department of Health, the HSE and Safe Food, specifically food and nutrition guidelines, serving size guidelines and a sample 3-week menu plan. Shielta, the National Quality Framework for EC, also recognises the importance of proactively promoting the development of healthy eating habits in children while supporting their enjoyment and appreciating of eating as a positive social experience. Within these standards, services are encouraged to inform children and raise awareness with parents and families about healthy eating. Increasing play and activity are key elements in the treatment and prevention of childhood obesity, and under the regulations, EC services must also promote safe physical play and activity both indoors and out. The DCYA has administered a number of annual capital grants for EC services to support the purchase of outdoor play equipment so as to encourage outdoor play and activity. More broadly, since its establishment in 2011, the DCYA has supported play and recreation through establishing a local authority play and recreation network to bring a more coordinated approach to supporting play and recreation at a local level, providing annual funding for play and recreation initiatives, including support for the annual National Play Day and National Recreation Weeks that raise the profile of play and recreation at a local level, and administering the DCYA Capital Grant Scheme for Play and Recreation to support the development or refurbishment of play and recreation facilities. In recognition of the importance of early childhood for laying the foundations for later development, where positive behaviours such as a healthy diet and weight are established, the DCYA has, in partnership with Atlantic Philanthropies, progressed a range of prevention and early intervention initiatives. These have added to the evidence base on how to improve children's outcomes and in particular how to tackle childhood obesity. The evaluation of one particular initiative, Preparing for Life, found that at age 4, children in that programme were less likely to be overweight. 23% of the children of families receiving this programme were overweight at 48 months compared to 41% of children that did not. Work on mainstreaming the learning from this and other initiatives is now underway with the support of FUSLA. The DCYA is in the process of finalising the National Strategy for Babies, Young Children and Their Families. This 10-year strategy will focus on the first years of a child's life. As with Better Outcomes, Brighter Futures, one of the goals of this strategy will focus on children's health, and the issue of childhood obesity will be given priority. We have been working very closely with the Department of Health to identify potential actions to add to the very significant programme of work already committed to under the obesity policy. Among the areas for consideration are strengthening the role played by parents and families and the wider community, including ECE services where early development unfolds for most children. The strategy will be published by the end of this year. Thank you for your time and attention, and I'm happy to discuss any of the issues raised.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brooks. I'll now call on Ms Flaherty and Mr McCormack to make your opening statements. Thank you both.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I want to obviously thank the committee for the opportunity to present to you today on this important topic, which I suppose in our world is a major public health priority. The committee will be aware of the government's National Obesity Policy and Action Plan launched in 2016 under the auspices of the Healthy Ireland Agenda. So this policy, which takes a whole system approach and covers a 10-year period up to 2025, was developed with a high degree of consultation, including, as Dr. Brooks mentioned, with children and young people themselves. Childhood obesity is a key priority under the obesity policy, as is reducing the inequalities that we see in obesity rates, where children and indeed adults from lower socio-economic groups currently have higher levels of obesity than those in better off groups in society. While recent data suggests that there may be a stabilisation in the increase in levels of overweight and obesity in children and adults, and any positive direction in those trends is welcome, there is no room, obviously, for complacency. Being a healthy weight is no longer the norm in our adult population, and the obesity policy seeks to drive a society-wide change in norms around healthy lifestyles and healthy environments to prevent the significant range of health complications that come with obesity, and to reduce the overall burden for individuals and families, as well as the health system and the wider society and economy. I will concentrate in the rest of this opening statement then to report to the committee some of the early progress and priorities in implementation of the obesity policy. As with all our work under Healthy Ireland, cross-departmental and cross-sectoral cooperation is fundamental to our approach to implementation. This involves in particular working with the two other government departments that are here today, but also across the departments of rural and community development, sport, planning, social protection, as well as local authorities, the health services, the education sector, and increasingly and more importantly, engaging with citizens and communities across the country. The Department of Health has established an obesity policy implementation oversight comprising of officials from a full range of other departments, as well as key academic and health agency representation. Subgroups on reformulation of food and drink and on healthy eating have been established as initial priority areas for action. Work has commenced on a roadmap for reformulation of food and drinks to reduce the sugar and fat content in those, and engagement with the food and the retail industry is and will be a key factor in delivering on that. In addition, a voluntary code of practice for food and beverage promotion, marketing and sponsorship has been developed, involving representatives from, again, the food industry and advertising sector, as well as various statutory agencies and government departments. This code was published in this year in February, and work is currently underway to operationalise it. The committee will be aware a sugar-sweetened drinks tax commenced on the 1st of May this year, and work is underway between the Department of Health and the Department of Finance on the evaluation framework for that measure. New healthy eating guidelines and a food pyramid resources for the population aged 5 upwards have been published and widely disseminated and continue to be disseminated, and that includes to all primary and post-primary schools. In addition, ourselves, 3 departments here with the Department of Social Protection and Employment Affairs developed new nutrition standards for the school meal scheme, and they've been introduced and are being implemented. And work has now commenced in developing healthy eating guidelines for the 1 to 5-year-old age group, which I think will be a very important and valuable resource for parents and for carers and for the early years sector in the coming years in terms of nutrition. In the HSE itself, there is a healthy eating and active living programme which is supporting work in the education sector, as well as with parents, families and communities in delivering a more coordinated approach to prevention and early intervention in child obesity. This includes a 5-year communications campaign called START, which was developed in consultation with parents. It's being delivered in collaboration between ourselves, the HSE and Safe Food, with a focus on supporting parents to make healthy choices around things like food and activity. The committee may be aware, actually, we launched the next phase of the campaign, which is around screen time yesterday. A first clinical lead for obesity, Professor Donald O'Shea, was appointed in the HSE in 2017. Health assessments, which include weight and height checks, have been introduced in the GP contract for the under 6s, and the HSE is also implementing a national breastfeeding action plan, which is very important and relevant in terms of prevention of child obesity. I just mentioned that under the broader Healthy Ireland agenda, a number of other major initiatives support the implementation of the obesity policy. One of these is our National Physical Activity Plan, which is one of the key developments arising from Healthy Ireland, and implementation of that plan is well underway in collaboration with the Department of Tourism, Transport and Sport and a range of other stakeholders, including the other 2 departments here today. Our Healthy Ireland 2018 communications campaign has been aiming to encourage people to make small healthy changes under 3 themes: healthy eating, physical activity and mental well-being, all very relevant again to obesity prevention. And we are working with a range of national and local partners to deliver a very wide range of communications and citizen engagement activities. The Healthy Ireland Fund, which was initiated in 2017, has supported a range of actions, again at both national and local level, many of which are targeted at children and which aim to support the obesity policy and the physical activity plan. And I may just add that a very important and innovative strand of that has been co-funded by the Department of Children and Youth Affairs in terms of providing funding to the Children and Young Person Services committees to help deliver activity at local level. Finally, I'm pleased to advise the committee that the government recently, that's in July, agreed to establish a Healthy Ireland office in the Department of Health to build on the progress to date and to further strengthen cross-government collaboration on the implementation of Healthy Ireland. This development will further bolster our collective efforts to implement key policies, including the obesity policy, which are all aimed at improving the health and well-being of our population. So I hope the members find this brief update useful, and obviously we're very pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Clarity. Mr. McCormack, you might continue.
I'm with Kate.
So it's a joint,
yeah,
so you're allowing her to speak for the 2 of you. That's great. I now call on Mr. Cusack to make your opening statement. Thank you.
I'll be making
Oh, sorry.
a statement on behalf of the
That's okay. The women are speaking today. That's good. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to the committee's discussion on childhood obesity. Schools and the wider education sector have a vital role to play in promoting healthy lifestyles. The Department would like to acknowledge the commitment of schools in promoting healthy lifestyle choices for students in a number of ways. The curriculum, for example, physical education and social personal health education, through schools' policies, including healthy lunch policies, and by the use of resources and programmes chosen by schools. Work by the Department of Education and Skills in this area aims to equip students with the skills and knowledge to enable them to make the right choices for healthy lifestyles throughout their lives. At primary level, PE is one of the 7 core curriculum areas. The National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, which is the body designated by the Department to assess and implement curriculum change, is currently conducting a review of structure and time allocation in the primary curriculum. In the framework for junior cycle, the importance of PE is reflected in one of the 8 principles which underpin the framework, namely that of well-being. Since September 2017, all schools must offer a programme of well-being to their first-year students. Well-being crosses the 3 years of junior cycle and builds on substantial work already taking place in schools in support of students' well-being. A well-being programme will include learning to enhance the physical, mental, emotional and social well-being of students. The Junior Cycle Wellbeing Programme begins with 300 hours of timetabled engagement in 2017 and builds up to 400 hours by 2020 as the new junior cycle is implemented fully in schools. PE, along with social, personal health education and civic, social and political education, will form the core parts of the Wellbeing Programme in schools. Among the 24 statements of learning under the framework for junior cycle are statements that the student is a confident and competent participant in physical activity and is motivated to be physically active and understands the importance of food and diet in making healthy lifestyle choices. One of the 8 key skills requirements for the junior cycle programme is that a student will stay well and be healthy and physically active. At senior cycle, a new specification for Leaving Certificate Physical Education has been published and allows students to study physical education for the Leaving Certificate exam. A framework for senior cycle physical education has also been published. This framework provides a structure for PE teachers to plan a broad programme in PE for students who do not intend to take PE as a Leaving Cert subject. The framework will support learners in developing confidence, competence and creativity in a range of physical activities. The new subject and the framework were rolled out to 80 Phase 1 schools in September this year. The Active School Flag is a department-funded initiative supported by Healthy Ireland. The Active School Flag is awarded to schools that strive to achieve a physically educated and physically active school community. The investment being made under the National Development Plan will also support the promotion of physical activity in schools. The NDP provides for an €8.4 billion investment in school buildings over the period 2018 to 2027 to deliver on NDP and National Planning Framework objectives through addressing the twin priorities of catering for demographics and ensuring a strengthened focus on refurbishment of existing school stock. This investment will result in an almost doubling of the capital budget for school buildings, €540 million in 2018, rising to an annual average of circa €1 billion in the second half of the NDP period. The strengthened focus on refurbishment of existing school stock will have different strands, including a PE hall build and modernisation programme that ensures students in all post-primary schools have access to facilities to support PE provision, particularly also in the context of the rollout of PE as a Leaving Cert subject. The Department of Education and Skills works closely with the Department of Health and the HSE on the Healthy Ireland agenda. The Department is represented on a number of groups, including the National Physical Activity Plan Implementation Group and on the Obesity Policy Implementation Oversight Group. Healthy lifestyle guidance issued to post-primary schools in 2015 and to primary schools in 2016. This guidance was drafted in consultation with the Department of Health. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms Sexton. I'll now take questions from the members of the Joint Committee. Deputy Rabbitte, when you're ready,
Thank you, Chair. And thanks, everybody, for your presentation here this morning. I have a number of questions for all, if that's okay with you. I'm going to start, I suppose, with the Department of Children and Youth Affairs. All right. You spoke at length there about the ECEC versus, my question is about full-time versus the 3 hours that children are there. My question is also around the fact that only 30% of all children attend creches on a full-time basis. The rest are attending at home. So there's only 3 hours there where it's a captured 3 hours, where we know we have over 90% attendance of the early years sector. So what exactly are you doing in a targeted approach for the capturing of the 90% attendance? As in, what are you doing for everybody that are uniformly getting the same approach? Because the children who attend the ECCE, some of them coming in with their little lunches themselves. So where do you work with in relation to the healthy eating policy in educating the parents and educating the staff and most importantly informing the children? So what is your strategy just specifically at the ECCE sector of information? Because you know that I know very clearly how well the full-time children who are attending childcare facilities, the guidelines are there. They're very clear as to the meal plan, the 3-week rotation and everything else like that. But I'm really concerned about the 97% that everybody is getting information. So that's one of my questions. You talked about the capital grant, that is it going far enough? The funding. Have we enough funding going out to the early years sector? Like, we know that it's 4.4 million that's announced on an annual basis, but of that, that's not all for outdoor play. And with the capacity being at such a huge level at this moment in time, and with creches looking for expansions or the extra room or the prefab, that's eating into their space. So how are you balancing that between outdoor space, or do you look at it completely from actually moving the children from a sedentary position to movement within the room? Is there a way of monitoring that? And how do you know, like, it doesn't all have to be outdoors, but children should be moving every hour within the hour in order to get them into the mobility. That's what I'm really interested in. And the national strategy. What is your viewpoint regarding weighing children attending the early year settings? So I can. Will I ask all my questions, or will I just go one?
No, that's fine.
Is that okay? I'll just focus
the 4
on
of us today, so no, we can have a good interaction.
Okay. Can I just clarify the last point, the national strategy and the view of
weighing.
Weighing.
Yes.
Okay.
Like, we have to be able to measure children. Mm-hmm. So does the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, because we've had the national school teachers in, we've had the primary, the post-primary, and they all have a particular viewpoint in relation to weighing, and I've asked the same question of everybody. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to know where ye as the department sit regard to measuring children. It's not just the weight, it's the height, it's everything else, mm-hmm. the fitness, the mobility, as part of gathering our data. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So if I just go to the first question in relation to what we're doing in relation to children attending the free preschool programme, I mean, all services who are in contract to deliver this programme must comply with regulations, and under those regulations there is, under Regulation 22, there is a requirement to have a healthy eating policy in place, but also to support children in their awareness of healthy eating. There's also our Shield the Quality framework for early childhood care and education, and that sets out quality standards for delivery of ECEC, and under that there is standards around obviously educating children on healthy eating choices, but also engaging with parents in partnership with parents and informing parents around healthy eating and healthy choices. So that's in terms of regulations on a universal basis what's done. There's also another programme, and it's delivered under the Healthy Ireland programme, the Healthy Ireland Smart Start programme, that's been rolled out nationally to preschool services, and focusing currently on children from age 3 to 5. It's been delivered so far to 20% of services on a national basis, but that is a whole programme around healthy eating and engaging in physical activity and promoting that, engaging with the preschool practitioners, but also with family and children themselves. So there's work happening there. In relation to the capital grant, so for 2018, over €1 million was assigned to a capital grant for outdoor provision, and I suppose every year a decision is taken in terms of how we prioritise the capital allocation, and we engage with the county childcare committees, with Pobble, and try to identify priorities. So for this year, outdoor provision and enhancing the outdoor play facilities was prioritised. Under regulations, every service who registers with TUSLA from June 2016 must have access to outdoor facilities on premises, and for those who register before June 2016, they must give children access to the outdoor on the daily basis, and that is also under regulations which TUSLA inspect against. In relation to the national strategy for babies and young children, we do identify obviously children's health as a priority. We're aware of, in terms of weighing and the GP contract, that children are weighed at 2 and 5 under the free GP care scheme, and there's also a range of developmental checks. We know maybe Kate might come in on that, but in relation to kind of weighing in preschools, there is no policy in relation to that.
Sorry to interject, but I think what Deputy Rabbitte is asking is, what is your view on that? Because there has been some controversy as to whether it should be GPs or in schools or wherever, you know. So if you don't have a view on it, that's fine, but I think that's what Deputy Rabbitte
it's not something that we've explored up until now.
You haven't explored?
It's not something that we've considered up until now.
All right.
So say obviously the free care for under 6s, so as Dr Brooks has said, children are weighed and measured aged 2 and 5. I don't have the exact percentage, but we do know that uptake of that scheme is very high. It's in the early stages, but part of the I suppose point of having those weights recorded is it starts to give us a national profile of the population. There are also issues, I think, around how you appropriately interact with parents, and I suppose don't do anything in a stigmatising manner. So there has to be great care taken to not only the setting but how you approach the weighing of children. So even the GPs who are doing it now for the younger children need a good bit of, I suppose, training in terms of how to broach the subject and discuss the results with parents, particularly if their child is showing signs of overweight or other issues at an early stage, that they can refer them on or advise them to things that are maybe available and helpful. So there is an issue around that. I know some people have been in before you mentioning about weighing in schools, but that's not something that we've kind of considered. I think some of it is from that perspective in terms of how do you do that in an appropriate manner, plus all children have free access to GPs who are already doing that weighing. I think part of, and particularly the approach that we're taking cross-departmentally and under the new strategy that Dr Brooks referred to and our joint campaign START, is really about how do you go with supportive messages to parents to, I suppose, show them, because I think some people have been in before you to say that many parents don't recognise for various reasons that their child may be overweight or the implications of that. So you have to do it in, I suppose, a supportive manner of looking where that person is at and what things, small things that they can start with to be helpful around that. Just on your first question, one of the things I mentioned that we are developing are new healthy eating guidelines for 1 to 5 year olds. So the Food Safety Authority Scientific Committee is currently, it's close to finalising the scientific guidelines for that, and then we'll have a new set and a suite of resources for 1 to 5 year olds. So I think that would be something that not only for parents but for all early years care settings, regardless of the time children spend in them, to have, like we have the nutrition standards in schools, that there'll be actually, I suppose, some maybe more clarity, but also supportive suggestions for people about how they can have that healthy diet, because sometimes people know what it should be like, but it might be more difficult in real life to attain it. That's helpful.
Thank you very much, Dr Brooks, for your answers there. There's 4,500 creches registered with the ECC in this country. €1 million is what's spent on capital funding towards facilitating the outdoor spacing. That works out at €222. Now, I know that's not how it is spread by any manner or means, but €1 million isn't going halfway near enough to what is required out there. As I said to you before, with capacity at the issue and with the outdoor space area being used and land being as precious as it is, what I'm hearing on the ground is they aren't getting enough supports to support them with the outdoor space area. So that's where I'm looking at, where are the alternative initiatives coming from to inform people that you don't need to be just outside with wee toddlers to have them moving around. You can have them moving around in a class setting. So is there a policy to develop that if they were to move every 10 minutes within the hour, that's actually good mobility, so you can teach children that sitting down, like I've said this here before, sitting down is our new killer. We have to teach people, our little people, to get up and move. But if we're not investing into the outdoor area, how are we equipping the staff to educate them in the indoor setting? So maybe that's commentary, but I don't think the €1 million is going far enough. In relation to the weighing and the measuring, I'll talk to the two of you and my viewpoints on that. We have to develop a database somewhere. And the fact is it's part of the GB contract. I think we should be normalising what we're doing as opposed to taking it away from in a particular setting. I think we should be normalising it, but I do think we need to start gathering data. And the best way to gather data, if we're talking about the earlier sector, we've a 97% take-up in the ECCE. Surely we should be starting at the first point of entry. That should be with the GP, but there should be a mechanism for continuing it on. Because in one of your presentations there, you talked about the socioeconomics and which are more likely to have obesity levels within them. If everybody is attending an early childhood setting, is that not the most normal way then with the policy document and everything else that's been launched to be able to engage with the parents, to be able to give the feedback back? If it's done in a normal setting, it's no different than holding your pen, to be quite honest with you, from my viewpoint, and that's only my viewpoint. I had questions then as well for yourself, Kate. Where am I here now? Yeah, I think that was it. My main questions for your good self was in relation, how do you measure and how are you collecting the data? And the GP contract, what's the buy-in of it? How much data has been gathered? And have you analysed that data that has come in? And what percentage of it has been collected? Because I believe it's now we should be doing this. So that was really all of mine, what was about for yourself.
The exact percentage, but the uptake is very high. We don't yet have data on, I suppose, for me, the key ones would be the numbers of children who've undergone the age 2 and the age 5 check. We understand that they are doing that and recording that. There is, I suppose, a time lag in terms of that data then being able to come back to us for analysis. But you're right, that would be a very key baseline, not only in terms of having the satisfaction or the assurance, shall we say, that parents and children are undergoing the assessments, but then what is that telling us about the weight of the children as a population. We do have a study, it's called the COSI Childhood Obesity Surveillance, what the I is initiative. I think it's a global project, so Ireland participates, so we have results every couple of years out of that for our children. So our key data on levels of childhood obesity come from that. So the latest COSI's in the field, I think nearly finished in the field, so we will have up to date on that. But the trend data that we have about the stabilisation, so it weighs kind of 7, 8-year-olds, first class, second class children. So we have seen a stabilisation in that the levels of overweight are not going up, but there is a disparity between boys and girls being more overweight, and then big differences between, or not the same narrowing of the gap in terms of stabilisation in DEIS schools. So I think that the data that we will have in the coming months will be very helpful for us. So this again is very objective measurements. It's actually weighing and measuring children in Ireland. So that's a key data. So under the obesity policy, that's the key data point that we'll be using to measure success against the target, not only in terms of getting a reduction, not just stabilisation, but also the narrowing the gap and the inequalities.
That's very welcome to hear. Can I, Chair, can I ask it? Yeah. If you don't mind, I'm going to follow up with you on that particular point, Kate. So Is it every first and second class in the country that would have participated, or was it a snap view, or how many schools?
It's a population representative sample. It's a number of thousands of children. Again, apologies, I don't have the exact figures, but I can certainly send
if
on
you don't
more
mind,
detailed
yes.
information. Yeah, but it's a nationally representative sample.
And can you see then where I would love to see it in the early childhood setting, and if you were to do it again at the 7-year mark, and if you were to do it again later on, you actually are gathering the data, and I think it's in later years that we will reap the rewards. And you know that
completely, because the earlier that we are able to intervene, so the only
and keep it as normal as possible.
And normalising, yeah. I think when I suppose that would be, and I wouldn't disagree with you in terms of how we normalise, and we said there's a lot of behaviours or things that we need to normalise. So, but we're a little way, I suppose, off that in terms of people's understanding about being able to explain to them their child is overweight and what that means for them, and in a supportive way what they might do about it. So there are challenges in terms of moving that norm forward, but I wouldn't disagree with you that
the norm I talk about is the setting. The norm I talk about is the setting, because with the other representatives we had in from the various teaching unions and stuff like that, they spoke about, they felt the stigmatisation, the bullying aspect and all of that. So I believe if the normalisation starts at the early intervention years, it's just normal, it's part of the data, it's the collection of it, it's no different. That's where, plus the fact is, we're one of the few countries that don't do it. That's where it's coming from. Now, finally, Ms Sexton and Mr Cusack. The fact that I have 3 children in post-primary means I have a lot to say in relation to the education system, and in relation to PE, and in relation to sports halls, and in relation to investment. So I suppose really what I want to discuss here is, as part of the junior cycle, you have mentioned SPHE, CPHE and wellbeing and PE, and it's all in the one tranche. It does not mean to say that years ago when we talked about PE, you got X classes of PE a week and at least you knew that the child was physically engaging. They might not want to participate in sports at home, but you do know that they were participating in school. So will you explain to me, and possibly to a lot of the people listening in, how many hours a week or how many classes a week under department guidelines are children supposed to participate in PE? That's my first question.
It's on the curriculum side, so
all right.
Yeah, so at primary level it is 1 hour of PE per week. At post-primary level, what is recommended is two class periods per week. So that typically is about 80 minutes per week.
And is that every week of the 38 weeks in the year, or is that then diluted back into being part of the SPHE, the CPHE, and is it just actually that it works out in a quarter of the year?
Certainly at the senior cycle, it would be your PE class every week, and as you point out, there is change happening in terms of the wellbeing programme, but typically it would be PE every week.
It would be PE every week. And how are we finding it with the recruitment and the retention of PE teachers? Is there a shortage at the moment?
I'm not actually aware of in terms of PE teachers.
Right. You also talk in relation to sports hall, and you talked eloquently there about under the NDP and everything else, the 8.4 billion. But if we were to link on from the early years, primary, and now we're in post-primary, an awful lot of the schools in the Western Seaboard, we don't have the gym facilities for them that we talk about. Like, I talk about my own school in Portumna, like I talk about the leaking roof. But like it's classroom spaces we're supposed to be talking about. Or if you talk about below in UN where they're trying to buy a sliver of land, you go to the department, they say, sorry, no, it's classroom spaces we're looking at. How do we marry it so as we can actually balance the well-being and the physical well-being of the child versus the academic? How do you view that in the Department of Education?
I'll take that one.
Thank you.
Yeah. We have to balance it in relation to classroom spaces. As our priority is to provide bums on seats, or have seats for bums, if you know what I mean. So, but also as part of any building project that we deliver, be it a refurbishment project or a new school building, we provide sports hall facilities, or in primary schools, GP rooms. And if you look at the schedule of accommodation that is either given for post-primary schools or primary schools, the biggest piece of single infrastructure is the PE hall or the GP room in the case of a primary school. So in the case of all new buildings we're doing at the moment, or major refurbishments, we look at the PE as an important part of that, and we bring up the facilities in those schools up to the norm we provide for any new school now.
So how much funding is left aside then in relation to every year for older schools that need to do refurbishment, just solely in relation to sports hall or outdoor space area? Because up the road from me there's a place called Tina National School, and they had lumps of stones in their field, as in their play area, their safe play area, and they couldn't get it under the minor work scheme. So I'm trying to figure out here, where does physical activity and the safety be balanced out as against the bums on the seats?
Well, it does. And actually, at the moment, we hadn't had the resources. What we have been doing for the past number of years is putting the bums on the seats. But now, given the extra funding that we have, and especially coming in line in the latter half of the NDP, that is our focus will be to provide PE facilities.
But the latter half of the NDP is 2027.
Well, it's 2023 to starting then.
It's starting then?
Yes.
But we will have lost a complete cycle of children before we ever start.
No, but we are, Deputy, we are providing sports facilities in halls. There is also facilities within the summer work scheme where we allow schools apply for funding to upgrade play facilities and outdoor areas. And at the moment we're looking at the last tranche of some works applications, and there will be an announcement before Christmas on schools that will get funding for upgrading their play areas and so on.
All right. All right, thank you.
If that's all right, Deputy. Senator Warfield, please.
Thanks, Claire. I just had two questions, one for the Department of Youth Affairs, Children and Youth Affairs, and then one for the Department of Education. It's just around the development of a strategy for babies, young children and their families. I'm aware the Department recently launched the LGBTQI Youth Strategy, which runs from 2018 to 2020, and the National Youth Strategy, I think, runs from 2015 to 2020 as well, maybe. And I just wondered, is there capacity within the department to deliver on these, and all the actions deliverable aren't deliverable by the department itself and are cross-government in many cases, but is the capacity there within the department to deliver on the actions across all of these strategies? And I know in the context of the LGBTQI strategy, there was an oversight committee, there was a youth advisory group, there was an independent chair. Could you talk to us about the process through which the National Strategy for Babies, Young Children and Their Families was developed? And I'm sure probably the work of this committee was of benefit to that process as well. Also, the cost involved of developing those strategies, is that all internal work? Is there consultants or something like that? I don't need exact numbers, but I was just interested in ballpark figures of how we develop those strategies within the department. And then just on the active school flag, I remember as Mayor of South Dublin, one of the most joyous occasions was the Green Flag, the Green Schools Initiative. I presume that's a physical flag. I haven't heard of it before, admittedly. But is it gaining traction? And are you aware of the number of schools involved? And could you share that with those stats with us? Sinead?
Sure. I can come back to you with separate data on the development of the other strategies, the LGBT strategy and the youth strategy, if that's okay, but maybe I'll concentrate on the strategy for babies, young children and their families. The process to develop that strategy commenced some time ago, and a group was established, an expert advisor group was established with representatives across children's services and academia, and they reported on recommendations for the earlier strategy. It was called Right from the Start and was published in 2013. So that was one of the key inputs to the development of the strategy. There was also a separate consultation undertaken with children themselves, aged 3 to 5, and that report also fed into the development of the strategy. And separately, we had 2 open policy debates to inform the strategy, which involved a range of academics, service providers, or organisations with an interest across all of children's lives: health, education, welfare, and so on. And those open policy debates took place, one this year and one in December of 2016. Separately, an interdepartmental group was established with the government departments really with a key interest or a key role in delivering actions under the strategy, and that interdepartmental group is set this year. And we've also engaged obviously in bilateral discussions across government departments and agencies in terms of finalising the strategy and actions and content, obviously informed by evidence. So the development of that particular strategy was led by the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, with significant contributions from other government departments. And as I said, there were some consultations with children and young people, children themselves. In terms of the capacity of the department to deliver, well, it's a whole of government strategy, so we obviously will have actions to deliver ourselves under the strategy. It will be a 10-year strategy, and we will take an oversight role in terms of implementation, but there are other departments who have and will be signing up to delivering actions over the period of time as well.
Children and Youth Affairs would hold them to account on their actions?
Well, we will have an oversight role in terms of implementation, and we are agreeing the implementation structures and at the moment in relation to that.
Sorry, just one other question. Have I missed any strategies between the youth strategy, the LGBT youth strategy and the babies and young children? Are there any other ongoing strategies?
There is a participation strategy as well, yeah, and they all fall under, they're all constituent strategies of Better Outcomes, Brighter Futures, the policy framework for children and young people.
Thanks. Cheers.
Thanks very much, and thank you all for your submissions. If I can start off with the Children and Youth Affairs, I just want to ask you, regarding the regulations which which your department has put in place, which stipulate that the service must ensure that children in attendance at an ECEC scheme receive a nutritious diet. So I want to ask you, what are we talking about here? What sort of food is provided on these schemes? And you also say that there's mechanisms in place which monitor it. So if you can outline to us what is the mechanisms in place, and is there any penalties for those service providers who aren't following the guidelines? So I'd be interested in hearing that. I also want to ask you about, if you can just go into detail for the benefit of the people who may be viewing in, just if you can explain to us a bit more about the Parent for Life programme and go into detail with that, I'd appreciate that bit. So if I can just will I throw them all out to all the other departments as well? Okay, on the Department of Education, I just want to, firsthand as a parent who has 2 children in primary school, acknowledge the work that is being done at primary school. We've seen, I think every parent who's probably watching this, the programmes, Super Trooper, Food Dudes, Walk to Work scheme. So there's fantastic work going on at primary school level. But I think when we move from primary, where we've done all this hard work, and we get into secondary school, I think that's where we're seeing, difficulties arising. We've educated our young minds to think, eat healthy, participate, but then when we get into the secondary school environment, I think there's a bit of a contradiction. While we're educating our children, the environment itself isn't sending a good message. So I just want to ask, I know it's not actually your department who looks after it, but regarding vending machines in schools, I'd like to see what your opinion is on that, because I do believe, as a parent, while we've educated our children about lunch boxes, when we go in, we have all this around. I also want to ask you about, have you ever done an audit? We had many submissions in here where people were talking about water. Have we done an audit where we should have water fountains in schools? Which, just see what way we are in that. And an audit in around PE halls. How many schools are we looking at that hasn't got adequate facilities regarding PE halls and canteens? I also want to ask you, there was a lot of talk about making home economics a compulsory subject. So I'd like to get your views on the home economics end of it. And if it was to be made a compulsory subject, how much would that cost the department to be kitting out, you know, all these schools for it? And just to get your opinion in around the no-fry zones, there's been a lot of talk about it, so I want to know what is the department's opinion on these fast food outlets being, you know, near our schools. Then if I can just ask health, just a few brief questions on health. The Irish Times reported yesterday that there was delays by the Department of Health and Finance and the mechanism for the Code of Practice governing the marketing of junk food to children. So I just want to ask you, what is the status of this voluntary regulation? I also want to ask you, look, we've all seen that the sweetened sugar tax, it worked, right? Industries already were reducing sugar before it was actually even implemented. So I wonder, has the department any other initiatives? Would you be looking at, you know, fat content, salt down the line? And have you spoken to the Department of Finance about ring-fencing some of that money that's coming in from the sugar tax to actually tackle obesity problems? And that would be me.
Thank you, Deputy. Okay, who would like to go first? Ms. Sexton?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we were conscious that, you know, primary schools, I think we find there's so much more flexibility because it's the teacher with the students all day. So I think we're conscious of that, and that is why there is so much change now at post-primary school. The junior cycle framework is very significant in terms of that, and it's all about. It's not so much focused on the content of each of the curriculum, but it's all about learning outcomes. It is about teaching students to be responsible citizens, to be competent and confident, to have good decision-making skills. Also part of the junior cycle framework is the wellbeing programme. And for I suppose maybe in the past at post-primary level, the area of wellbeing, it might have been seen to be part of the remit of the guidance counsellor. But now the emphasis is on the wellbeing of the student is the responsibility of all staff in school. And that is where the wellbeing programme is a whole school initiative. Within the wellbeing programme, there are the subjects that we mentioned already: PE, SPHE, CSPE. Guidance is also in there, but there's a lot of flexibility for schools in their wellbeing programme to include whatever they feel is necessary to meet the needs of their student cohort. So they could bring someone in to talk about bullying or healthy eating, but there's a real emphasis now on the wellbeing of the student. And also, as part of the junior cycle framework, the emphasis is on moving away from that strong focus on the terminal exam. And there is a focus now on the classroom-based work of the student, and that takes a certain amount of the stress away from the students. In terms of vending machines, we're aware at primary school it's not really an issue. Our life skills survey in 2015 showed that practically no primary schools had vending machines. The 2015 survey showed that 27% of post-primary schools did have vending machines. Now, the position of the Department of Education is that it doesn't intend to instruct schools to end the practice of having vending machines. But also, as I mentioned earlier in my opening statement, the Department has issued healthy lifestyle guidance to schools, and part of that is about schools having healthy eating policies and looking after the well-being of students. So a school in having their vending machines needs to balance that. Also, of course, schools could have vending machines that would have healthy snacks in them. And my colleague then will talk on the...
Yeah. Deputy, first of all, you mentioned drinking water, availability of drinking water in schools. And as part of any school project, in primary, there is a drinking water tap provided in every classroom in the school, and also at various different locations, the GP room and servery and so on. In post-primary schools, there is drinking water in some of the meeting rooms and things, but also there are drinking fountains provided around the school, and at least one for every 150 pupils. And externally, it's the same, to a maximum of 6 within the school, and with a maximum of 4 outside the school. And it's in every school, right? Now, we have read and we saw correspondence from the Irish Heart Foundation regarding and they did a very small survey, and the came out of it that they were saying that 40% of schools didn't have free drinking water. The department, I'm afraid, doesn't accept that, and we are happy that every school has a free supply of tap drinking water. And any school that doesn't, it is open to them to apply to us for funding, and we will be more than happy to provide funding to them under our emergency work scheme or under our summer work scheme to assist them with doing that. And since that announcement was made, we've only been contacted by one school looking for, and it wasn't that they didn't have drinking water, they were concerned about the number of drinking fountains they had in their school, if you know what I mean. So I think the department is satisfied that all primary public schools have a free supply of tap drinking water in their premises. You also mentioned, I think, PE halls and how many PE halls are there, and I'm afraid we are not that well placed to that, but however, the Department of Tourism and Sport published their strategy during the summer, and as part of that they're proposing to carry out an audit of all sports facilities around the country, and we're going to liaise very closely with them now to include schools as part of that.
You know when that audit has been?
Well, they're going to do one every 2 years, they have, and actually we have a meeting set up with them early next week to get the ball rolling as to find that. The idea is that we'll get a whole town approach as opposed to having tourism providing maybe community-based sports halls and schools providing that. So the idea is that we could share, and it'll save everybody taxpayers' money. And if you look at that, if there's one in a town, does they need to put 3 or 4 into schools in that town as well? And I think the last thing you mentioned was no fry zones in schools, right? Well, the department, like, it's open to any school that to object to a planning application that comes forward, as any other individual could do in relation to it. The department is not keen to see fast food outlets opening up close to schools, but like anyone else, the guy interested in putting it there makes his planning application. It's up to the schools then, I'd say, to object.
Well, by talking about that, but I'm just asking, say if I was a local school, would the Department of Education come out and support the school in their objection?
Of course we would. If any school approaches with assistance or to assist them with an objection or a plan, we would certainly give them letters of support. That wouldn't be a problem.
Okay. Home economics, the opinion on?
Yeah, sorry, I touched on that. Yes, there has been some calls for home economics to be made a mandatory subject. As you know, we have the challenge though of the curriculum overload. So there are no plans to make it a mandatory subject. What we would say though, many first-year students are offered a taster menu, so they would have the option to study that, and maybe would give them the interest in carrying on with that. Transition year also include cooking modules as part of their programme, but also the whole area of healthy eating and nutrition is very well addressed in the SPHE curriculum.
And just, Deputy, you mentioned the cost of providing, like if we provide the cost of kitting out a home ec room is about 50,000 based on the department's equipment list for a home ec room, and if we were to build one standalone, say a school was looking to provide that subject now, it costs roughly around 277,000 to build a PE hall, and as part of a 1,000 people school there are 4 home ec rooms provided as part of that schedule of accommodation for that school, a school of that size.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
No,
Sorry about that.
sorry, Chair, we've a few more.
Oh, sorry. I popped out for a second, so I thought they'd been addressed. Apologies, Deputy Mitchell. Go ahead, Ms O'Flaherty. Apologies.
Questions in reverse order. You asked about, I suppose, ring-fencing the take from the sugar tax and other measures. Current government policy and policy of the Department of Finance is not to hypothecate tax take for particular reasons. I suppose there's also a point around if the tax is as successful as we hope, it will be a diminishing tax over time. However, as I mentioned in the opening statement, the government has since 2017 initiated a Healthy Ireland fund, so specifically for us to drive some of that cross-sectoral partnership work, and obviously around that time of year of estimates, discussions and that. Certainly in the department we make a very strong case for the increasing of that Healthy Ireland Fund to support that work. In relation to the question around reformulation, so yes, that's we prioritised under the obesity policy the work on reformulation. As you say, there is a certain interest in the industry in doing it, and we've had positive engagement with them. So we set up the reformulation subgroup as a priority, so that's setting out a roadmap specifically around sugar and fat content. We work quite closely and I suppose keep a watch in terms of what's happening in the UK, because Public Health England also have, so they have strategy and targets around particularly sugar and fat reduction and related reductions in portion size. Because obviously a lot of the products that come onto the Irish market are there. So our committee has done good work. It's got, I think, the bones of a draft roadmap forward, and we actually had quite a large and very well attended by the industry workshop with the industry in terms of, so it's one thing to set the targets and get consensus on that, but then how do we, I suppose, support and keep it moving, because at an industry level then there are complications or perhaps in moving their products. But we do see, and I think the sugar tax is a good example of it, that in anticipation of measures coming, the industry often will start to make moves in that, and some of that is from consumer attitudes and consumer things as well. In relation to the voluntary codes of practice, yes, I suppose we have a number of stakeholders who are very interested in getting that up and running, and they were launched in February. Our commitment was to have it progressed this year. We are making progress on that. Again, we've had very good and positive engagement from the industry, so that's both the food manufacturers, the retailers, the advertisers. There are some, I suppose, complex issues around how we would monitor certain aspects of the codes, not all of it. For example, there is a piece in the code where retailers have signed up to make I suppose, bigger efforts around promoting healthy food and making healthier food, fruit and veg, cheaper, therefore more maybe accessible to people. So there are issues around, I suppose, how we procure the monitoring. So it's a piece of getting implementation moving, and we're engaging with the industry in that in terms of setting up a register of all the companies so we know everyone who's signed up to this. Some of the challenges are around the monitoring piece. There isn't, I suppose, an obvious statutory body, for example, who monitors particularly non-broadcast media. So that's a challenge that we're kind of working through. How do we set up to get all the parts of it moving? So we are intending to have significant progress made before the end of the year on that.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Was there another, Ms Brooks, did you? Or?
So in relation to the Preparing for Life programme. So the Preparing for Life programme is a community-led prevention area intervention programme led by Northside Partnership. It initiated in 2007 with joint funding with the Department of Children and Youth Affairs and Atlantic Philanthropies. And in the main, the focus was on improving school readiness of children in the area who were found not to have appropriate skills for actually starting school. So the initiative was developed as a kind of 5-year home visiting programme, and joined with that is the PPP parenting, positive parenting programme. And in terms of school readiness, they actually took a holistic definition of school readiness that included physical health and well-being, social and emotional development, approaches to learning, language development and cognition. And I suppose in relation to this discussion this morning, one of the findings of the health study was that it did have positive impact on childhood obesity. But I suppose that was in the broader context of improving school readiness. And I guess the contributing factors to that were around the home visiting programme, which went into homes and spoke to parents about how to support their children around healthy eating and being prepared for school. So it's very much a programme that focuses on supporting the parents in a positive way to get their children ready for school and have the skills and knowledge to support their child to achieve good outcomes.
Thanks very much. Did you want to comment as well, Ms Brooks? Yeah.
Just one question around healthy eating in preschools and the regulations. So I'd mentioned that there is a requirement to have healthy eating guidelines in registered services, and the recent TUSLA publication, the Quality Regulatory Framework, sets out guidance on how what should be incorporated into the healthy eating policy, and it sets out that it should be informed by the food and nutrition guidelines for preschool services, and sets out guidance around serving size and how it should be promoted and on display for parents to see. So that is kind of, there's guidance on that, and the regulation itself and the regulations are inspected by TUSLA, who go into preschool services and inspect against the regulations. So that's one of a number of regulations that they inspect against. Penalties?
Yeah.
Well, on an inspection, I suppose the TUSLA inspections are published online, and if there are issues identified in the course of inspection, there's guidelines given to address any issues in the course of an inspection.
Thank you, Deputy Neville.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and apologies for being late. If any of these questions have been asked already, will you let me know, and I can just look at the transcript. The first one is in relation to how I'm looking for the department's thoughts on this in relation to the system itself. Do they believe, in relation to physical activity and the changes that have happened over the last 10, I'd say even 10 years since the introduction of smartphones, that the effect that has had on physical activity? And do they believe that the system or the facilities that we're providing, or the actual system we have for providing this via curriculum, is moving fast enough, or are we behind the curveball? And how much behind the curveball do they envisage we are at the moment? I understand infrastructure takes time to catch up, so I'm not beating anybody with a stick here, but I'd like to just get their thoughts on that. Secondly, what are your thoughts in relation to anecdotal feedback that we have heard, and I've heard myself as well, in relation to insurance in schools stopping kids from running around the place? And if you have any thoughts on that, if it is happening, I'm hearing that the usual stock answer is that it's up to the schools to provide their own insurance or an insurance provider. But I would like to know what the department's feeling is on that, because if kids are being prevented from playing by insurance, I think that's a huge issue, a massive issue, and I'm trying to get some concrete evidence on that. Anything I've been hearing is anecdotal. So.
Did you want to come in, Ms. Flaherty, on that?
I'll start with the first part in terms of the overall piece on physical activity. So the current, I suppose, data, it's quite old, so we are repeating. It's the CSPA study, which was done in 2009, published in 2010. So that's where we have those very low figures of, I think, 9 and 12% around the number of children in primary or post-primary meeting the physical activity guidelines. So ourselves in the Department of Tourism, Transport and Sport are actually funding a redo of that to see if it's more up to date. So I think when we get that, we'll maybe get a handle on, is it a little better than that or not? So that's certainly part of the work, I suppose, across all our strategies, of having up-to-date data to inform us of how we're doing and where we may or may not be making progress. Certainly you would have sense perhaps that there is more participation in sport and physical activity in the population, but it is more difficult maybe to get an objective measure of that. Sometimes that's particularly adult self-reported. And then there's the piece about how active are you? Do you actually meet the guidelines, and how important is that? So how do we have a measure of some activity, including play and all of that? So these things get a little bit technical, but I think when we have the results of that in 2019, it might give us a better and up-to-date handle on how active our children and our teenagers are. So that study will be very important. In terms of the role of smartphones, I suppose there are always technological advances, and in terms of things that maybe perhaps make us more sedentary, so whether it's cars or more people working in offices where they're sitting, and certainly phones. Part of our START campaign that we are running now with HSE and Safe Food, as I said earlier, we launched the new phase of that, so it's not just physical activity, healthy eating, but supporting parents around other key drivers like sleep and screen time. So encouraging people not only that they should reduce screen time, there aren't any not specific guidelines around that, but we do guide in terms of a number of hours per age that's I suppose, is to reduce excessive. But I think the key message on that is really it's about having balance in a child's life. Obviously, for young children, there's no particular maybe value in it, but certainly for older kids and teenagers, there's lots of educational and entertainment value in the things that they do on their phones. But it's having that balance between physical activity and other social interaction that I suppose is good for their normal emotional and social development. So it's something I suppose that we keep an eye on, but again, you have to go to parents in particular with supportive messages about making some changes. So it's not cutting out screens or banning screens and what do you do instead. It's about supporting people to be aware of the detrimental effects of overuse and not another balance in the child's life. Telling them, I suppose, and again, tips from other parents on how to do this. How do you introduce a regime in your home about hours spent on TV or screens, and then giving them positive suggestions and supports around things they may do instead. And a lot of that is actually direct interaction and play or other activity with their children. And again, our messages to people is about how they can do that in a simple way without costing them money. So I hope that answers on that.
Do you want to come in, Ms. Sexton?
In terms of bringing in the PE at Leaving Certificate, I suppose there's the positive effect of smartphones there in that work is ongoing on a PE app. So it will help the Leaving Cert students to monitor their progress in terms of their physical activity. In terms of the other issue around insurance and children not being able to play, we have very little evidence that that is a significant problem in schools. We do hear of this idea of a no-run policy, that kids cannot run at break time, but we believe that's in the case of a very small number of schools.
It's happening.
I would think, yeah, we've no concrete evidence of it. It's anecdotal, but if it is there, it's very small.
If there's anecdotal feedback happening, I'm getting too much of it for it not to be happening.
Yeah, me too.
And if it is happening, it's a massive problem, because what kind of message is that sending out? Does that is now, we'll say, on the verges or the extremes, but when does that become the norm? Because I don't want to be having a conversation here in 5 years' time, if I am here, the same way as we're having a conversation about car insurance today. That started happening 5 years ago, back in 2013, because that kind of an effect on kids is just going to be detrimental.
It certainly wouldn't fit with the healthy, the healthy lifestyle policies that schools should have in place.
Any study by the departments in relation to what schools may be coming under this regime?
No, we are issuing the next life skills survey in 2018. We'll issue it before the end of this school year, and we can include a question to schools about.
I would I can't understand why it hasn't been done already, to be honest. I really can't. If the department are aware of anecdotal feedback in relation to this, why this hasn't been identified. If it's 2 schools or 4 schools or 10 that it hasn't been identified, and something done about it.
Chair, if I might add on that, because I know I was more closely involved in the last life skills, because we would work closely with the department. So if I'm not incorrect, we did have a question, I'm not sure how it was worded, about no-run policy, and I think the finding was that the number of schools was tiny in terms of schools that now had it. So I think it's been a number that's been diminishing. I can't remember the percentage. I think something like about 3% or something of the schools that fed back, but it had decreased over time.
There's still schools there that it's happening.
Yes.
One school's too many. That's what my point is. We're here trying to fight the wave of childhood obesity and everything. Even one school is too many, and I just can't understand why the departments haven't identified what schools they are to go in and try and fix the problem. Now, if it's a cause of political pressure or the lack of political pressure, let me know if it's on our side. But if it's on a departmental side, I cannot understand why that hasn't been identified and stop put to it to be nipped in the bud. So if anything's to come from this interaction this morning, I would propose and look for a seconder that those schools would be identified and a stop straight away put to that practice. Just put a stop, guillotine that practice straight away, and I'm sure it can be done. If there's a provider there that's doing this already, that the department would help the schools to find a new provider. There's obviously other insurance companies out there who are okay with this, but in a new provider, so kids are allowed to run around in a playground, to put it simplistically.
Thank you, Deputy.
Tom, I'm from Galway and I'm hearing it regularly. You're from Limerick. You're from Mayo.
Yeah.
It's right across what we're saying.
Yeah.
Tom is exactly correct in what he's saying there.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy. Are you finished, Deputy? I just had a couple of questions and comments myself, and just to pick up on Deputy Neville's point, that's a particular bugbear of mine for years, actually, the running in schools issue, and something I've done a bit of work on, and I'm convinced that it's much more than is being admitted by schools for whatever reason, because obviously it sounds so crazy that we'd be trying to stop children running in their schools. But I've been told by a few parents recently that it has happened. So I think that there should be a directive from the department rather than you know, they're the risks of life, and we can't let the insurance industry, you know, hold us to ransom when it comes to children running in schools. So it's something I would feel really passionately about, and I would hope that you might just do a little bit of work on it after this meeting. Just with regard to the healthy eating policy, what is the new programme called? The Healthy Ireland Obesity policy. Yeah, sorry, I just want to get it correctly referred to. It was put in place in 2016, and it was to report annually, and it has never reported as to my knowledge, and I just wonder why that is. And while the one thing I know for sure is that we're going to have to be very patient with the issue of obesity, it took a long time for the patterns and habits to be established as a society, and it will take time for us to make progress, but it would be nice to know that we would be getting some indicators of the work that's being done and any progress that is actually being made. You know, people talk about the fiscal space when it comes to this time of year especially, but I think the fiscal space would be a lot larger for services for our citizens if we get on top of this issue. It's approximately, I think, you know this better than I do, I think it's approximately 2.6 billion that's being spent. Well, it's hard to quantify, but between health and everything, it's a huge amount of money that is lost to the exchequer due to basically lifestyle. So reformulation was something that interested me as well, but I think there is meaningful interaction with the food and drinks companies on that, but just, I suppose, that way, Ms O'Flaherty, you spoke about the reducing amount of tax from the sugar tax for that reason, I suppose, because a lot of drinks companies are getting themselves cleverly out of the bracket where their item will be taxed more heavily because they're putting less sugar in it. So just, I suppose, you mentioned that there's an evaluation framework being put in place. So I'd be interested to know a time frame on that. Again, I wouldn't like it to see it to be years away before we know if that's having some impact. And indeed, to pick up on Deputy Mitchell's point about ring fencing, this is something that I've been kind of hammering our Minister on, but I don't think that he's for moving on it. But there is a precedent for it in the plastic bag levy, and even if we don't actually ring fence it, if we could make some commitment that that money would be spent in this area, because I think the consensus view is that there is, and it's a point that Deputy Rabbitte made as well about funding. I think you were talking about the early childhood years, but in general, I don't think there's enough money put into this, because, you know, it's of monumental proportions, and I really don't think society have fully come up to speed with how serious it is in terms of the next generations, and the fact that we could have, you know, the first number of generations who will come whose parents will outlive their children, you know. And then the weighing of children, just to finish on that. I know that the GPs are weighing children, or at least supposed to, but I think we have to grow up as a society when it comes to this issue. There is something in what's being said generally, even in here, about like skirting around the issue, and like I understand because I've lived it actually, but it is delicate and you need to be very careful with children. But if we're a little bit more mature in how we approach it as a society from a very early age, I think we'll make progress. You know, I wouldn't subscribe to a lot of the stuff that Dr. Eva says, or the way she goes about saying what she has to say can be very cutting and, you know, not necessarily how I would wish to communicate with people. But there is a core point there that in other countries, they just approach this in a more grown-up way? And do we just have an Irish approach to this, where we're kind of not wanting to say that you're somehow failing as a parent, or address the issue in a more head-on type of way? And I know it's a delicate balancing act, but that's really, I suppose a lot of my things were more comments than, because it's hard to come up with something fresh once everyone else has spoken. But if you have any responses or comments to that, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Reporting, so the obesity policy was launched in September 2016. We set up the oversight group a year later, and now, so we are 2 years into implementation. So we have two things going on. One is we are preparing a progress report. As you know, there are a number of detailed actions, and there are other cross-sectoral activity. I suppose it's all going towards that. So we're starting an exercise to capture all of that, because you're correct. I suppose sometimes we get parliamentary questions or other opportunities to present. So perhaps we haven't been as out there in terms of reporting on the progress and the work that we have been doing, focusing on doing it rather than reporting it. The other piece that we have started with an academic team from UCC is actually developing an evaluation framework for the obesity policy. So we'll be working again with stakeholders and other departments in the coming months to just build, I suppose, what is a robust evaluation framework. First of all, that you are taking all the quantitative data, progress on actions, but then how you recognise the qualitative data as well that may nod towards societal changes in that. So we hope to have that draft framework by the, I'd say, March of next year. So that'll be the framework then under which we will annually report under it. So we just didn't progress that at the very start. We focused on some other things. I suppose I've already answered the question in terms of the ring fencing of funding and being a matter for the Minister for Finance.
I'm losing that battle,
yes.
I think. Yeah.
Well, in terms of evaluation, so we are progressing again an evaluation piece of work with the Department of Finance, again to measure not only the levels of consumption of sugar-sweetened drinks, because the levels of consumption are still very high in children and in young adults, and particularly in lower socioeconomic groups. So we haven't gotten, I suppose, the big change in consumption and consumer culture there, but also to capture the behaviours and attitudes, and again, people's awareness of their diet. Are there going to be positive effects in terms of them looking at the other overall sugar or other things in their diet? And I suppose just in relation to the weighing of children and the issues that you raised there, I mean, we are on a journey around normalisation, so you will notice in particular the names of our policies and strategies and our campaign, we talk about a healthy weight for children, so we don't really talk about child obesity per se anymore. So some of that I think is important, and you have to bring, I suppose, people with you. The only comment I would say in addition to what I said earlier is we also have I suppose an attitude or a mindset issue with the adult population who don't recognise, I suppose, the risks and the issues around 60% of the adult population being overweight. So I suppose there's a journey to go on with everyone, again, to tackle that in a supportive way, to say to people, the small things that you can do, whether it's around your diet or being more active or doing things, they will all add up over time, and they're worth it. And they are difficult changes for people to make. It's a big decision, not only to say, I want to make a change, but to actually follow it through. And
to have the know-how.
Yeah. So I think we're on that journey, and certainly the more we talk about it, but in a supportive way. So I think that's probably the general approach of our strategies and policy work across government, is to work with citizens who are very engaged. People want to be healthy. They want their kids to be healthy. Yeah. So it's what are the best ways that we can do, based on evidence and learning, to support people to do that more and more for themselves.
Yeah. Thank you. So I think that really concludes. Did you want to come in briefly? Yeah.
It's going back to the Department of Education. It's to do with the vending machines. When we had the representatives from the secondary schools, or be it the parents or whatever like that, some schools are using vending machines to supplement income. And that's exactly what was said here. I was shocked. And the chair will bear me out. That is exactly what they said. The reason they needed to have the vending machines in their schools was to supplement an income. It was an income stream for the school. Now, you talk there today about policy and everything else. I think vending machines in schools should be banned, unless they're dispensing water. And we have that addressed already, as in the water. So, yeah, but we don't need vending machines that are selling sugar drinks. Like yourself, Kate, is just after telling us there about the high levels of consumption amongst young people. Like, we have to get real about it. So I think there should be a directive straight away from the Department of Education banning vending machines in school. And hospitals, yes, but we'll everywhere.
Schools first.
Schools first. We'll start with schools because we have the Department of Education here. But I think we can't be writing policy and not be real about it unless we're taking the white paper documents that you're issuing to the schools, and if they're seeing on the other side, oh, this is an income stream, we can't lose it. It's children's health we're talking about here, and it's how we relay the message, and it has to come from the top down, because the children aren't in control, so we have to support them. That's my final message there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to comment on that, Ms. Flaherty?
In relation to vending machines, so the policy in the HSE, it's called Healthy Vending Policy. So that was introduced a couple of years ago, so I think they'll be reviewing it shortly. So that was to have a 60-40 split in terms of healthier foods, which were around kind of portion size and calories and the type of food, so that I suppose there'd still be choice there for people, but that people would be able to make healthier choices. And the vending machines in the hospitals and the health things have so they don't have branding anymore from any of the major food or drink providers, but it's kind of messages prompting people to make a healthier choice. So we have, I suppose, worked with the Department of Education in terms of that, at least starting there with the 60-40 and a healthy vending policy for schools that currently still wish to have vending machines would be the place to start. I suppose I'm not aware that we've maybe looked too closely at the implementation of that, because I suppose again in secondary schools, and not to speak on behalf of the Department of Education, but as Rita has said, in terms of the outcomes and around young teenagers, it's helping them, I suppose, to make informed decisions and positive choices. So I suppose the part of the path that we have gone is about having healthy vending policies.
Thoroughly agree with every word that you're saying there.
Yeah.
But I suppose my shock in relation to it was seen as an income stream. And if we're seeing it as an income stream on the back of children's health, because we know they'll buy it regardless, even if it is a 60-40 spread, the 40% will sell very fast and they'll be replenished fairly quickly.
And just to come in on that, I mean, there are so many opportunities for children to get junk food without putting in their faces when they're in school as well. You know, really and truly, there should be a directive on this from the department. We need to take this a bit more seriously. It's not good enough. It's just not good enough.
Actually, it's not. Particularly when I go back to the wording was an income stream.
Yeah.
And that was said by either was a board of management representation or it was from the union. But they did actually, and if we go through this transcripts, I can't remember exactly the group, but that's what they viewed it as, an income stream.
Yeah, we are aware it is used as an income stream for schools. But the current position, as I said earlier, is that it is a matter for the school. It is for the board of management of the school, and currently the department has no policy in place to ban vending machines. Because it's a matter for the school's board of management.
Why is it a matter for the board's management? In all fairness, I mean, the department it doesn't let them teach whatever curriculum they want in different subjects. You know, I mean, I don't think that is micromanaging schools. I think it's a really good policy, healthy policy for us to have. And please go away and think about this as a policy that we should implement in our schools. It's not helpful to anyone to have, regardless of income streams. That's pathetic. So, you know, we need to get rid of them out of schools. I've been talking about this for about 7 years. I mean, seriously.
Just, Chair, if you don't want to say, like have you the data of the schools then? Because you are aware then of the income stream. So are you aware then of the schools, or the department aware of the schools, who actually have vending machines within them?
Our last life skills survey showed that 27% of post-primary schools had vending machines, and we will again be running the life skills survey. As I say, I'm here today, I'm setting out the current policy and position, but I will bring it back to the...
Because I think it's a name and shame, it's going to come to that. And as elected representatives, I actually think it's down on us. And I will have no problem in naming and shaming the post-primary schools that have vending machines in their schools in breach of healthy guidelines.
Yeah, clerk is asking us not to name, but
You know, I won't name.
But I mean,
But
I suppose
that comes back out of a parliamentary question. Like, there's many ways to skin a cat to get the information out there,
and
but
just
it needs to be done.
A parting comment: we'll have the county councils, you know, the local authorities in with us soon, and you know, we've spoken a lot about no-fry zones. But I mean, in all fairness, talking about a no-fry zone near a school when a school is providing junk food in the school, it's nonsensical. So, you know, I'd be really grateful, Ms Sexton, Mr Cusack, if you could report our comments to your colleagues and have this as an agenda item on some meeting soon. It really would just take a directive from you.
That is an income stream, which shows there's a serious shortfall as well for schools.
But how are the other schools managing?
That's the other side.
Okay. So thank you all very much for your very helpful and useful contributions. We really appreciate you taking the time to come in to us. And this meeting of the Joint Committee is now adjourned until 9:30 on Wednesday, the 10th of October. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.